Thank you. You know, there's so many things that grab us up these days. Oh, I'm just musing out loud. I'm going back once again to the column called Media Watch that I wrote in the African Times back in started in 1996, ended 1997. And I was paying attention to a number of things. So these were the things I wrote about. So there's no strict breakfast, lunch, dinner aspect of the thing. It's just simply something that came into my mind and went into my ballpoint pen and was transferred into the columns.
Okay, and it was African Times was your column was called Media Watch?
Media Watch is what it was called. And if someone would like to Google into ancient times, they would Google African Times, Media Watch.
Published
Charles Anyiam, the writer, yours truly, Odie Hawkins.
Got it.
One of the things that a lot of people in our country are not aware of is that there's racism in other countries. And strangely enough, in countries that have predominantly black populations. I decided to focus on some of the elements of that in this column that I'm calling the racial overtone in those Latin novellas. The novellas are the what do we call them? Serials that we see every day.
Yes.
Daytime soap operas.
Yes.
Novellas.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Yes.
Yes.
For the benefit of those who are not hip to the Latino novellas, let it be understood that they are the equivalent of the North American soap operas, but with a distinctive Southern flavor. Thousands may deny it, but we know that millions must have a taste of soap every day on both sides of the border. And one of the most fascinating elements of these soap operas, novellas, is their perpetuation of stereotype characters. The North American soaps, despite their melodramatic excesses and nebulous beginnings and endings, have been forced to acknowledge the fact that people of color do live on the planet, wear dreadlocks, intermarry, eat Thai food, have excellent futures, cry when sad, teach aerobics, own factories, travel to foreign countries, speak Greek, Igbo, Yoruba, God, Tree, and Croatian, and at the end of the day, tend to be more or less like the rest of the people in our warped society, despite the cultural distinctions. That's the beginning. It's not quite that way in the novellas, the South American soaps. If Africans, African Americans, and others of African descent want to satisfy their curiosity about how/where Latino racial attitudes may come from, they should carefully study the geopolitical history of the slave business and the contents of the novellas. As we all know, the African diaspora has given the world a strong taste of melanin seasoning and overwhelmed many of the cultures it came in contact with. Who can remember anything about the indigenous cultures of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Barbados, Jamaica, and Veracruz after the devastation of the Euro slaughter and the importation of the African worker bees? The European colonists The European colonialists worked a clever game on the heads of many of their imported workers and some of their domesticated house people. In many places, starting with Mexico, they convinced the conquered that they were not conquered. They were simply Spaniards in disguise.
Oh, really?
This may explain why, in many of the Mexican novellas, returning to the theme, it would be difficult to identify the stories or the people as Mexican. The caste color ranking usually grants leading character status to the blancos and mestizos, that is to say, whites / less whites, and the lesser roles to the indios and negros. There should be no doubt in anybody's mind that this perpetuation of racial distinctions has an interesting effect on the minds of many of the Latino population. One little Nicaraguan boy identified Africa as the place where slaves came from. That's all he knew. After hundreds of years of racist indoctrination and thousands of hours of novellas, many Latinos tend to see themselves as honorary Europeans. Of course, for the people who can pass for leading characters in the novellas, there's no problem. Driving farther south, I was astounded to discover at a Brazilian party that many of the Brazilians, fully equipped with Africoid shadings and facial features, wanted to be known as Portuguese. A hip Brazilian lady pulled my coat. Remember, in history and in the novellas, it wasn't a marriage to the black man and the white woman that created the Brazilian mix. But since no European can create an African parent, the Portuguese have resorted to propaganda to do what their sperm couldn't do. It's there in the novellas. So in plain view, but on another channel and in another language, the usual suspects are doing their naughty stuff. The Brazilians seldom free themselves of their racist attitudes unless there is a need to win a soccer match. Fortunately, Professor Abdias do Nascimento and other strong forces for social justice are working to force the white-dominated government to acknowledge that African Brazilians do much more than samba during Carnival. Take a look at the cultures that degrade their indigenous roots and deny their Africanity. Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, Mexico, Brazil. As a matter of official policy, it will help you understand the attitudes of many of the people who share our space in the belly of the beast, if you remember some of what I've said. Now, going from Brazil to one of my favorite subjects, Capoeira. The title of the column is Let's Talk Capoeira, an African martial art. Do we have a martial art? We? Who is we? 10-year-olds? No, us, African American, Africans. Yes, we do have a martial art. It's called Capoeira. Why do you ask? Because me and Jimmy Choi were talking about martial arts, and he said he'd never heard of an African martial art or an African American martial art. Those words were the provocation for a 45-minute lecture on the African Brazilian martial art called Capoeira. Cedric Adams, wizard artist and good friend, introduced me to Henrique Cloistovaco Garcia do Nascimento in 1978 and to the dance martial art that he was teaching in the favelas of Upper Echo Park. Here's the brief form. When the Portuguese opened shop for the blaxploitation slave business in the 1500s, they snatched a large number of Africans from Angola and whipped them into the cane fields of Brazil. Most Brazilians agree that Capoeira was originally called Angola. The Portuguese had no idea that they were inadvertently transporting the creators of the second indigenously developed martial art into the Americas. No one has done the research necessary to determine what the Apaches, the Jibaro, the Caribs, the Guanatayabas, or the Sioux and the Seminole called their martial arts. They had one, they had some. But we can be certain that they did have them. Ironically, it seems that all of the indigenous peoples of the New World, Africa and Asia, have developed martial arts, but not the European colonizer exploiters. More research is also needed in this area. No kidding. Some people want to say when the Neanderthals came out of the caves with clubs on their shoulders and stones, that was the beginning of European civilization. But they didn't develop weaponless martial arts. The Africans that the Portuguese took to Brazil were practitioners of rituals and dances that emphasized the use of the feet. In Brazil, this emphasis on footage became the martial art that we now call capoeira. There are dozens of theories and hypotheses concerning every aspect of capoeira, which specific and African society took it to Brazil with the slave trade, how the form of the art changed over the years, when was it first utilized, who is responsible for its present form, what part did the Native Americans of Brazil play in the development of this art, where did the vocal and instrumental mirambao, pandeiro, agogo, atabaque, reco-reco, shekere components come from? What is the meaning of the word capoeira? What is the meaning of the word capoeira? And so forth and so on. Place 50 capoeiristas in a room and you'll get 150 theories, notions, ideas, and vibes about the origin and development of capoeira. However, at the end of the day, we do know this. There are two basic styles of capoeira, Angola and Regional, and that the art originated in Africa and was developed by Africans. Capoeira is alive and thriving in California. From the northern borders to San Diego, on July 12, 1997, I tripped to the World Beat Center in Balboa Park, San Diego, under the imaginative direction of Queen Makeda Dread, to witness a batizado, that's a baptism, presented by Professor Dennis Newsome's Capoeira Angola's Bento Grande, under the supervision of Mestre Touro from Rio de Janeiro. A batizado is held to acknowledge the student's graduation from one level to another. Cedric came with a camera, and I came with a ballpoint. Professor Dennis Newsome, the founder of Capoeira Angola, Bento Grande, and a former student of Cedric's, but now under the awesome wing of Master Touro, has firm credentials in a number of martial arts. Testa, the Ethiopian headbutting art, jailhouse rock, the African-American prisoner's contribution to the martial arts pantheon, kalinda, African stick fighting, savate, French boxing, as well as proficiency in several Asian martial arts, in addition to Capoeira Angola and Regional. We don't want to fool around with this brother. The group that Professor Newsome has started in San Diego, California, with the participation of a number of at-risk youths, has to be considered one of the most exceptional collections of capoeiristas, people who play capoeira, in the country. Capoeira is an extremely complex art that makes unusual demands on the capoeirista. The capoeirista is not simply expected to move well, but must also learn the songs and rhythms on the bow-shaped berimbau, the pandeiro, and other instruments, in addition to the specific etiquette that accompanies the play in the roda, the circle that contains the actions and the magic. And the magic. The capoeira's movements tend to be circular, but not always. The games tend to be circular, but not always. The games tend to be friendly, but not always. And in the roda, your best friend may be your worst enemy for a few minutes. In capoeira, there's Rama, our story, excitement, music, tradition, plus elements that can't be identified by names. Professor Newsome's Capoeira Angola, Bento Grande, lays icing on the question, do we have a martial art? Brian, my grandson, I'm glad you asked that question. Teach your children to ask questions. They might be amazed at what you know. That ends those two columns for today. And I'd like to say that I've enjoyed being a capoeirista for the last 40-some years. And hopefully, I'll have 40 more years to play. But, like everything else, I doubt it. Sounds like we're using some real music over there.
Just a little capoeira music for you.
I love it. I love it.
Okay.
I love it.
And who knows?
To the bang, to the bang.
To the bang.
Ashe.
Your website,
Tomorrow, same time?
Yes, your website is www.odiehawkins.com. Books can be purchased at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore. Go on the website and see the many books and accomplishments of Odie Hawkins.
Hey!